Wow, we're already at Unit 4. So, in this unit, we're going to explore how Reconstruction unfolded in West Virginia and all of Appalachia. We're going to look at political changes, the Freedmen's Bureau, railroads, new roads, long term impacts on Appalachian communities, too. Appalachia's geography, which we've talked quite a bit about, and their culture, which we're going to talk more about later, created a Reconstruction experience that was very, very distinct from the Deep South. As I've said multiple times, Appalachia's geography really shaped everything: politics, the economy, the culture. Communities were small and scattered and usually very self sufficient. Slavery did exist, but on a very small scale, which meant fewer large plantations and more small farms because of the geography. So, this is going to contribute to a divided loyalties during the Civil War. Some counties leaned Union, others Confederate, and understanding this background helps explain why Reconstruction here is going to look so different than it does in the South. Now, you already know that West Virginia's birth was a political act of Reconstruction. The state was created during the Civil War with very strong Unionist leadership. And this meant that Reconstruction policies, things like voting rights, loyalty oaths, civil reforms, they were implemented much earlier than the other states because they became a new state. And so they went through this way before the other states in the South did. And they were sometimes pretty aggressive about the way that they implemented their reforms, much more than the neighboring states are going to be. The neighboring states are kind of like wishy-washy about a lot of things. They were kind of taken by surprise, like, oh, now we have to come up with a new constitution, and it has to talk about the freedmen. But West Virginia had already been talking about this for 2 years, so it's going to be a totally different case for them. I just love this picture. Reconstruction politics in Appalachia. I just love it. I mean, it looks so like don't mess with us kind of thing. But political reconstruction was really controversial, and there were a lot of bad things happening. Unionists wanted to punish former Confederates. Lots of locals pushed back against any kind of federal control. Civil rights, they do expand, but it's going to be pretty slow. And racial tensions, well, of course, they're there. The mountainous geography, it's gonna make it so difficult for federal enforcement to get in there and make sure that they are doing as they're promising to do. And so some of those communities, though, they were just too hard to reach, and they were kind of left on their own to abide or not abide by the rules of both the federal government and the state government. Now let's talk about the Freedmen's Bureau because all that political stuff is going to really affect the Freedmen's Bureau. Now, I don't know if you know this, but after the Civil War was over, this Freedmen's Bureau was created. Its mission and its purpose was to take care of those in need. And of course, that's going to mean all of the freedmen. What a lot of people don't realize is that it was also directed at poor Southerners that lost everything and had no way to rebuild. So the Freedmen's Bureau, it was a federal government tool. So the federal government will fund it and decide how it's going to look. And its mission included things like education, food, shelter in many cases, legal protection, fairness in labor, and really it's basic humanitarian aid. I can't talk today. So again, it was both for black and poor whites, and in Appalachia, the Bureau faced very unique challenges due to isolation and really limited staff. The Freedmen's Bureau never had a full staff anywhere in any of their offices, but here in Appalachia, it's going to really, really be a sparse amount of people. And of course, those that do not agree with having freedmen at all are going to go after the workers of the Freedmen's Bureau and threaten them, and sometimes actually do harm to them. And again, you're in Appalachia. The federal government can't get in there to see what's going on, to see who's doing the right thing and who's not. Now, the picture that you see in front of you is actually a contract that was created by representatives of the Freedmen's Bureau in order to protect freedmen. So that's kind of what it looked like. It's not big enough for me to really even see what it's about. I know somebody's promising somebody $500, but the cursive is that really really fancy cursive too. So I can't tell you what it is. But I wanted you to see why it was so hard for freedmen to get help. So if you look here at this map, you see Wheeling, Parkersburg, and Charleston. These are the three localities that they had a actual Freedmen's Bureau office, like the people that run things. So if you had a problem, you had to go to Charleston, Parkersburg, or Wheeling, which is all in the mountains. So agents are going to travel really long distances on horseback to reach the most remote communities. Some of them they can't reach. If you have an agent that is dedicated enough to walk in, you're probably not going to find that. I mean, you might, but when they do get to these remote communities, their job is to help secure fair wages, protect freedmen and poor whites from being exploited. They legalized marriages that had been prohibited under slavery too, and that was a big one because it was up to your master, as if you were a slave, whether you could marry or not. And a lot of them said no. They didn't want that connection. If they want to sell one of them, that gets into legal aspects and who do the children belong to? And if you're married, they belong to the father. And it's this whole weird mess. And so marriages in many cases were forbidden. Now the slave people did it anyway. They did it in secret, but it wasn't an actual legal marriage. And so the Freedmen's Bureau is going to help make those legal. So that's a really big step to getting some rights we wouldn't really think about for the new freedmen. Now, education was a really big deal. So you see this slide, education efforts by the Freedmen's Bureau. It was one of their very few successes, very few. And we'll talk more about its failure later. But schools will become so important to these communities. They became kind of the center of community life and gave them power and made the people feel like they had that power for the very first time. So a lot of it depended on missionary teachers, young women mostly that will travel from the north, willing to go into Appalachia, which sometimes was dangerous, but they did it. And then these black and white communities, they most of them built their own schoolhouses. They're not going to get federal funding for it, but the fact that they built their own black and white, it really shows how much they wanted education, how much they valued education. And literacy, of course, it's going to become a powerful tool, a way to be empowered. And the Bureau created classes for adults too. So think about Appalachia, so remote. You don't have colleges there in this time period. You don't have a lot of educated people. You have a whole lot of illiterate people. And so in the next units, we're going to start talking about labor and industry and all these people, whether you're black or white, you're going to sign a contract with these employers in these mines and all these other places we're going to talk about. If you can't read, they can basically do anything they want to you. You're going to put your little X down there that means you signed it, and now you're stuck. So it was very important to learn how to read, white or black. You had to know how to read. Let's look at labor contracts and legal aid. So you know that the education was pretty successful. It kind of got that learning bug, whether the federal government was involved or not. People wanted to learn. Labor disputes are going to be a necessity. So it was common that employers tried to maintain power, the power that they had prior to the Civil War. They wanted to have that status as the boss, and again, people lie to people, and the bureau agents, they're going to enforce good contracts, contracts where the employee is not being exploited. They're going to make sure that there is a contract that says you're going to pay this person to work. And there were times that you would go to work for a week, and then the boss say, "Sorry, you screwed up somewhere along the way. I don't have to pay you." And that is going to stop with the bureau's help. So this is another success. It's not as successful because you do have corruption. Of course, you have corruption, but it is pretty successful. They actually went as far as the bureau did to intervene in cases where violence was reported or even just intimidation was reported, and they took it to the courts. So they will not like show up as your lawyer, but they would help a freedman or a poor white person figure out how to get things into court and to get a lawyer. And sometimes they pay for the lawyer. They're not lawyers themselves, but you have to remember that courts, this is a brand new idea to allow a black individual to come to court. So that courtroom may be very hostile to black citizens, and the Bureau was there to help protect them from that as well. Now, there are a lot of challenges and limitations to the effect of the Freedmen's Bureau. So, despite it being so important, there are all these obstacles that are thrown in the way. Funding shortages is definitely one of the bigger ones. And President Johnson, who became the president after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, did not believe in the Bureau. He felt like that we were giving them a hand out and not a hand up, and these freedmen and poor whites would get used to government paying their way. I'm using air quotes, paying their way, and they would become lazy. And so he did not support this, and he found any way that he could to remove funding. So you have him and other and people in Congress that were just completely against it. So every time somebody in Congress said we need more money, it was shot down. So, and you have to add too, like the difficulty of traveling through Appalachia, like we just talked about. So you had to find people willing to go into those areas that had an education, that knew how to handle the courts and to help these people out. Now the bureau is not going to survive very long. It's going to close in 1872. And you did have some of these people that completely dependent on the bureau for food, for shelter, for help with education. They're going to lose all of that. They're going to lose it. Now, the education, the schools were built. A lot of the missionaries were kind of they were paid through like farm goods and things like that. Not all of them leave, but that support system that the bureau promised them and gave them for a short time, that's a huge loss for a lot of people, especially those living in Appalachia because they are so far out and hard to get to. I know I'm kinda jumping all over the place. We're going from education to lawsuits, and now here we are at the railroad construction and Reconstruction era Appalachia. But this is such an era of change, and so I feel like I have to hit it all. Now, railroads are gonna absolutely transform Appalachia. It connected isolated counties to national markets. It opened the door for industrialization. You might not think that's a good thing later, but for now, it seems like a good thing. Railroads were the single most transformative force in post-war Appalachia. Now, the C&O and B&O railroads opened previously inaccessible regions, especially in southern West Virginia. C&O expanded into the Kanawha Valley and the New River Valley, and the B&O can't talk today. The B&O is going to connect bigger cities like Wheeling, Grafton, and Parkersburg. And it also opened up southern coal fields in West Virginia to sell to the outside world. Now, we'll find out that that wasn't a great thing later. But right now, it sounds like a really good thing. So, rail lines, it's going to bring jobs, industry, new towns, but it also, oh, how do I say it? It brought in evil. It really did. Outside people are gonna move in that would never have come there before and take advantage and do bad things. These are mostly northern investors, are the ones with the money, and they're gonna fuel super rapid development in Appalachia. To give you an idea of how few railroads ran anywhere in Appalachia before this picture of the Civil Railroad are the railroad lines just before the Civil War broke out. So look along the Appalachian Mountains, look how few there are. Like one, and so these railroad lines are going to really open that up. But like I said, when the railroads started coming through, everybody was like, hooray, hooray, we're going to have access to the outside world. We're going to sell to outside markets. But it's not local people that are going to get rich from that. It's outsiders that will come in and exploit those people. So the railroad was an exciting, wonderful thought when it first came to Appalachia. But when it came to industry later, it's not going to be such a good thing. It really is going to cause some evils, and we'll talk about that more on the next page and then in the next unit as well. So, railroad labor and engineering challenges. Railroad construction was very dangerous and very labor intensive. Now, remember, you're going through the mountains. You're going to have to use things like dynamite to blast tunnels. Dynamite still wasn't a very workable thing. Like it was very dangerous. We had not learned yet how to make the wicks long enough for everybody to escape the explosion once you hit it or lit it. So there were all kinds of things made up. I know there was a Chinese group when they were doing the Transcontinental Railroad that made this thing that was like a trebuchet, and it like flung you away from the flame when you hit it. And of course it killed a lot of people. but they were still experimenting with stuff like this, building the CNO and the BNO. So lots of people are going to get hurt. Freedmen are, this is going to be a big job for a lot of freedmen, and they're going to work alongside Irish and Italian immigrants. So they're going to start mingling a lot more than they ever have before. And entire towns are going to spring up all along the railroad line and create depots and coal camps. And new towns, of course, will mean new jobs. So at first, like I said, this seems like a really great thing. Reconstruction seems very, very positive. You had help with the freedmen and the poor white people. Now you have transportation, and it looks great, but they're going to end up being exploited as well. It's like all the workers are in this time period. And of course, with new railroads, you're also going to get new roads and turnpikes. So, roads were just as important as the railroads, of course. State funded turnpikes are going to connect larger cities like Charleston, Clarksburg, and Lewisburg. So, in the state of West Virginia, you've got all these major cities now that are being connected either by roads or railroads. And they connect all these rural communities to schools and markets and courts that they had never been able to have access to before, and they reach coal camps and timber operations and offer more money making opportunities for Appalachia. As far as jobs go, not a lot of them are going to get rich. Appalachians, outsiders will though that move in. Like I said, roads were essential for connecting rural communities to those markets, the schools, and the courts. So roads really, if you're a local, were probably much more important than the railroad because that was your everyday life to the average person. So there were roads, of course, through Appalachia. A lot of them were destroyed during the Civil War, but they will be rebuilt bigger and better and more level, more able to have runoff so that they don't get flooded out after a storm. And again, just like with the railroad, the road crews, a lot of them included freed people. And a lot of them were working under contracts that the Bureau actually helped for them to put together. So that protection will go away when the Bureau closes in 72 as well. So again, a way to exploit the workers. What all this boils down to is economic transformation in Appalachia. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Again, like, look at this picture. Doesn't it make you want to go cough and blow your nose and get rid of all that black smoke? But Reconstruction is going to lay the foundation for the industrial era that is going to, of course, hit Appalachia. The region's economy is going to like completely shift almost overnight. Coal and timber industries are just going to completely explode, and like I've already said more than once, it's going to attract investors from northern cities. So this is going to bring economic growth, but again, exploitation, long-term poverty in a lot of areas, company towns where the owners basically own the people, they own the workers. So we're going to talk more about this in another unit, but I just wanted you to know that Reconstruction laid that foundation for these horrible company towns that we'll talk about in the future and for so much hardship that was yet to come in Appalachia. And of course, with roads and railroads, you're going to have a huge social and cultural impact. Infrastructure and federal policies are going to change the daily life of everybody living in Appalachia. That infrastructure, roads and railroads, communities, they adapted in different ways, and they created a very unique Appalachian identity through that adaptation. But railroads and roads, they're going to increase mobility. I mean, they're going to let people travel for work or education or trade. So, and Black Appalachia really came together and built strong communities through churches. Now they can get supplies in to build churches now because they have the rails and the railroads. And so churches and schools and civic organizations in the Black community are really gonna make them a strong, strong force as a Black community. Now, at the same time, you got to think about this. Modernization is going to clash with a lot of these traditional mountain cultures because they all did have a unique Appalachian identity. And now the modern world is knocking on their door. And so we're going to have another whole unit about social and cultural identity and what it was like to be Appalachia in this time period and before and a little bit after. But I don't want you to leave this unit and I guess we talked a lot about a lot of bad things in the other units too, but I don't want you to think that these people were put upon all the time and life was miserable, and it really was not like that. I mean, they just have a different way of looking at life and looking at their lives and what brings them joy. And you're going to read a novel, actually a couple novels in this class. One's coming up kind of soon, and you'll see this guy. He grew up in the hollers and of West Virginia and what his life was like. But he tells some sad things, but it's beautiful. He talks about the smells and the food and the camaraderie and it's just kind of neat. And yes, I did say holler. When I moved to Clendenin, it's a little town outside of Charleston, West Virginia when I was 15. I said something about somebody lived up the road from me, and my whole class at school laughed. And they said, "You don't say up the road, you say across the ridge or down the holler." So I learned to say that pretty pretty often. So I don't say it anymore, but that's the way it is there. That's just the way it is. Let's take a little bit more time to talk about Black Appalachian communities. So, these communities are going to grow really rapidly during and after Reconstruction. Lots of formerly enslaved families are going to move into the mountain counties thinking like it might be safer there. They could probably get land there. Work would be kind of iffy, but the safety and the land, that meant a lot. And unlike the Deep South, Appalachia's smaller towns are going to allow Black residents to build those tight knit communities that were centered around their churches and their schools. And they had some very unique organizations that we don't talk about very often. But one of the bigger ones in Black Appalachia was a group called the Odd Fellows. And it was just basically a group of Black, I think it was mostly men, that got together and kind of talked about problems and how to fix it and how to work together and things like that. Now, churches are really going to be the heart of Black Appalachian life, like I said, places where you could worship. You went there for an education very often to learn how to read. Whether you were an adult or a child, that's where they held political meetings. If you needed some kind of aid, you might get it through the church. So these kind of communities gave or these kind of things gave the Black community a sense of security in numbers. People are here that understand what I'm going through. And Black families are going to really establish stability and independence in a region where racial discrimination existed, sure, but it took different forms than in plantation states. So economically, Black Appalachians worked in coal mines, timber camps, railroads. The women worked in a lot of domestic service. Coal towns in Fayette, Raleigh, McDonald, you don't have to know these. I'm just kind of throwing them out there to, if you recognize any of them or not. They were home to large Black populations. Kanawha County had a huge Black population back then. And despite harsh conditions, the jobs that were offered there and the wages and the opportunities, they just weren't available in other places like they were in Appalachia. I mean, who would think that this backwoods, backward kind of people would offer so much opportunity to Black communities, but blended their African American traditions with mountain customs and things like music and storytelling and foodways and religious practices. Each group, whether you were a freedman or a born in the Appalachia kind of person, you had your own unique customs, storytelling, foodways, religious practices, all of that. And now they're going to blend together and create this very, very unique place to be. So it's a very distinct regional identity and it still exists today. I mean, you blended people's everything, your beliefs about everything from food to religion, and it came out to be this beautiful culture that still exists today. Let's look at the long-term legacy of Reconstruction in Appalachia. So Reconstruction did not solve every problem, but it did reshape Appalachia, whether that's good or bad. Infrastructure that was built during this era, as I've said, supported future development, again, good or bad. The Freedmen's Bureau laid early groundwork for civil rights, education, all of that kind of stuff that we talked about. So it's going to be short-lived, of course, but it gave them a foundation and a place to start. So If you're taking a regular US history class and they talk about Reconstruction as an overall thing in our country, it is considered a huge, huge failure. But this is one pocket in Appalachia. It is one pocket of people that they had nothing. I mean, nothing. Not even before the war. They had nothing. They relied on each other. The outside world was a mystery to them, but Reconstruction did open that door. It opened the door to other access to other things, to new ideas. Again, that can be good, that can be bad, but you can't look at Appalachia and say Reconstruction was a miserable failure like you can in the rest of our country. So that makes them really unique too. Now, there are famous people of Reconstruction in West Virginia and Appalachia. And one of the probably the biggest one is Arthur Borman, who became West Virginia's very first governor. Remember, we talked about that West Virginia was Virginia for a while to get their freedom, and then they become West Virginia, and Arthur becomes their permanent governor. And then you have Henry Gasaway Davis. He was an industrialist and political leader. Not a terrible guy. I mean, I'm sure he exploited workers like everybody else did, but he wasn't terrible. And then John Lynch. Was a black legislator and a civil rights advocate. Christopher Payne was the first black legislator in West Virginia. Major Granville Parker was a unionist leader that did all kinds of great things for the people of Appalachia. And then Reverend Charles H. Payne was an educator, and he was very much a supporter of the Freedmen's Bureau. So I don't want you to memorize all these names, but we're going to talk about some of them in different units, and I just wanted you to hear them. So you do not have to memorize them. The only one you might see on a test is probably Arthur Borman as West Virginia's first governor. So know him, but I just wanted to throw these names out there so they weren't completely, totally unfamiliar to you if you hear them later in one of the novels that you're going to read or another slideshow. I just want to sum this up. I've already said everything I'm about to say, but I just want to make sure you hear it one more time. So, this era is so essential for understanding how West Virginia became what they are today. Reconstruction in Appalachia was so unique, and of course, again, shaped by geography, the politics, local leaders' determination, and then you have that railroad and road transformation, and it's going to set the stage for modern West Virginia. So I know that's all a repeat. I'm just kind of capping it one more time. Now, I'm going to show you a reconstruction timeline that is, this is just a regular timeline of the major things that happened with Reconstruction. And then in the next slide, I'm going to show you very specific to West Virginia and Appalachia. So just a brief rundown, you see that the end of the war, end of the Civil War was 1865. Reconstruction begins in 1867, well, a little bit earlier in some places. Then they're going to ratify the 14th Amendment in 1868, which is going to give Black individuals, basically give them civil rights and make them citizens. So you see how quickly that happens. And you have impeachment of President Johnson. He was impeached but not removed. And one of the reasons that he was finally impeached is because he was so against the 14th Amendment and would not stop talking about it and bad mouthing it. And so Congress kind of got sick of him and said, look, buddy, keep your mouth quiet from now on, or we are impeaching you, but we're gonna impeach and remove you if you don't stop talking. And after that, he kind of does stop talking. Now, this is the West Virginia specific timeline. So you got Western Virginia counties from Confederate Virginia. 1863, West Virginia becomes a state. 65, the Civil War ends. The Freedmen's Bureau is created. 66 to 1867, you have those three offices, the big ones, Wheeling, Charleston, Parkersburg. Then from 1867 to 70, black schools are founded all across Appalachia. 1868, you have that C&O B&O Railroad being built through the Appalachians. And 1870 to 1872, coalfield access lines are built. Lots of new towns are formed. And then, of course, as I've said before, 1872, the Freedmen's Bureau closes. And then from 1873 to 1877, you're going to see this giant shift in politics across the United States. and particularly in Appalachia. 1877 is when Reconstruction is officially declared dead. And so that's why that it ends in 1877. Reconstruction is over, but you already have that rise of industrial Appalachia on its way. And of course, it's going to keep happening well after 1877. And so we are going to actually talk about that in the next unit, industry, and then coal mining and labor struggles later. So more bad stuff, more pressing stuff to come. But like I said, once we get through all this factual stuff, I promise that we're going to talk about things that are more pleasant, and unique to West Virginia and Appalachia. So thank you for listening to yet another lecture. And like I said, the next unit is on industrialization. So I will talk at you soon.